Hallelujah. We might be seeing the Hollywood barge begin to turn where identity politics is concerned, and we're seeing the confirmation that behind the curtain of what we call wokeness, that fake performative diversity, are really a bunch of pinheads with zero writing talent. It's exposing the fact that entertainment hasn't been about the audience for a while. It hasn't been about stories, it's been about the storytellers forcing us to watch them in a very Louis C.K. fashion. But I've noticed a funny trend over the last year. The bean counters in Hollywood are obviously starting to get the hint that the audience doesn't want this.
Don't worry.
She's got help.
I think they do want well-written women, but they are instead being given angry, bitter, girl boss Mary Sues, and it is a financial failure. Hey, I don't want this video to be a failure. That's why I need you to deliver social justice to that like button. Ric Flair noises. Just take a look at last year's Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. It was garbage. I wanted to find something to like, but it was just trash. Except for that first 20 minutes. That was good. There are just many areas that feel off, information that doesn't quite make sense. The ending seems to come out of nowhere. This movie shows all the classic signs of heavy rewrites and reshoots. The rumor is that the movie originally had Helena, played by Phoebe Waller-Bridge, as going back in time and essentially becoming Indiana Jones, retconning the entire series to be a heroine story. That rumor mill also said that when Bob Iger stepped back in as CEO and got wind of the news, he put his foot down and demanded changes. Based W. News about those reshoots and Iger coming back are around similar times, so it's not entirely outside the realm of possibility. The Indy-Helena relationship also feels odd throughout the movie. For the most part, Helena is leading Indy around by the nose, but then, every now and again, he just knows what to do for a minute. A cynical person, me, would think they looked at how badly they were beating down poor geriatric Jones and peppered in a few softballs for him to take the sting out. They do indeed go back in time, and Indy says he wants to stay, but Helena punches him so hard that he wakes up in the present days later. We know the movie was greenlit years ago when Star Wars sequel trilogy was rolling along, and we found out the Force is female, apparently. Strong female characters were all the rage, and every movie I'm talking about today was started around that time and then festered in development hell until now. In Indy 5, there seems to be a strange balance where Helena seems like she should be taking the lead because Indy is old, but never fully takes over. The movie wants her to be the star, but they're trying not to put Indy out to pasture too obviously. Disjointed is a good word for this movie, and it makes perfect sense when you learn that it had many revisions. The feeling of this movie is exactly what happens when someone tries to edit out story beats or rearrange a character arc without starting the whole thing from scratch. Paired with the rumors of Phoebe Waller-Bridge taking over as the hero, but then Iger demanding a change, it all kind of makes sense. Studio feared audience backlash and tried to prevent disaster, but they were too deep in production. So they had to patch things. But why would they want to change these things at all? The term strong female character turned from a selling point to a warning for the audience in just a few short years, along with the rise of the mocking use of the term woke. It's starting to get a little vague now, so I've been trying to sub it out from my own term, performative diversity, to try to add definition, but it's really hard to compete with the monosyllabic convenience of woke. It's short and it fits really well in, say, a YouTube video title. So clickable! I think we're seeing that term starting to come to the end of its life cycle, but it got its start as a theft from Hollywood, who stole it from black people, who use it to describe waking up to the realization that the system is against them. You know, similar to how red pill guys refer to taking the red pill and waking up to how society treats men. Hollywood took the idea and said they were awake too.
Do you mean woke?
I did mean woke, but it's grammatically incoherent.
They were going to be allies and would work to fight against the oppression by making everything about immutable qualities like skin color and what's in your pants.
Ironic.
We began to see characters and storylines that strove for two goals. One, the innocent, pushing the representation of groups they felt weren't on screen enough. And two, the parallel narrative that those groups were oppressed, and the oppressors, white guys mostly, needed to be lowered in status to make room for these marginalized groups. That first goal is a nice idea, but the combination of these two goals gave us characters and storylines that were often outright misandrist or racist at their worst, and even at their best, they were flat because the characters from the protected groups had no challenges, so as not to show any weakness whatsoever, and also no arc or growth, because What do they need to grow from? Are you saying they weren't good enough already? Conservatives began to mock this implementation of being woke and took the term as their own. Like most social politics, they may have begun as innocent ideas, but morphed into quotas and a crusade against the oppressors. DEI was born and brought in not only representation, but also fake jobs staffed by diversity hires, pity positions created by guilt-ridden white knights, or, ironically, jobs and promotions going to people based mostly or entirely on their superficial qualities. When men promote men, it's sexist. When women promote women, it's empowering.
Now you have become the very thing you swore to destroy.
That's always been the main issue with DEI as a concept. In theory, it sounds nice. Hey, just try to be aware that we as people tend to gravitate to those who look and talk like us. Just make sure you aren't accidentally leaving people out. But in practice, there is no way to implement this without committing the very sins it seeks to remedy. There's also the very strong connection to Marxist ideology that runs through all of this. That's where the oppressor-oppressed dynamic comes in. It's also why some people will say that it is wrong when men promote men, but not when women promote women. Because one is the oppressor, and so morally wrong, just because. And the other is the oppressed, and so cannot be morally wrong. And even if they are, it's only in response to the greater wrong of the oppressor. So we can use relativism to sweep it under the rug. That leads us back to the present day and the absolute atrocious products we're seeing and the apathy that is being created in the audience. Since these attitudes in Hollywood don't reflect the worldview of the general audience, they don't feel a connection, and they don't go to the theater. At its height, even when a thing was unpopular with part of the audience, another part felt that they were being good soldiers in the culture war, and so they publicly supported characters like Rey Palpatine or Captain Marvel. And there was also a decent amount of hate watching fueling some of these projects. However, that is turning to apathy on both sides. As they tend to do, Twitter warriors have moved on to some other conquest, and movie execs began to see that their cash cow was running dry. So they tried to fix projects that were already in the works. We've already looked at Indy 5, a movie that was clearly trying to set up a new golden era with a female protagonist, starring Phoebe Waller-Bridge, whose sardonic tone is completely at odds with the spirit of the series. But then we got two more examples. The Marvels and Madame Web. Now, The Marvels is tremendously compelling to me, and is the clearest sign of this lazy attempt to reverse course. I made videos with predictions about this one, and judging from everyone involved and Disney's general trajectory, I stated that the identity politics would be about as subtle as a cannon shot. Imagine my surprise when it was not to be found. Sure, Nick Fury was silly in this one, but there were no bitter speeches from any of the women about how much better the world would be if a man wasn't running S.H.I.E.L.D. Monica didn't commiserate with Fury about microaggressions they had both experienced. From a performative diversity standpoint,
stop trying to make fetch happen.
It was quite lukewarm, especially compared to some of what we were getting.
Holloway could never have gone through that. He's never had to prove his value to a parade of underwhelming men.
And yet, the movie is still a St. Louis-style underground garbage fire. The Marvels was announced in December 2020, when director Nia DaCosta had one movie to her name, Little Woods. It was also originally Captain Marvel 2, and Kevin Feige claimed that moving forward, Captain Marvel was going to lead the MCU. That same article I quoted from also said she wasn't just going to be someone who is incredibly powerful, she was going to be very human, very vulnerable, having multiple dimensions. Does Kevin watch the movies that they make? Disney was convinced that female superheroes were the new hotness that was going to take the industry by storm. And if it had been Storm of the X-Men, they might have been correct. They went all in on a female team, hired a director with only one feature film, the plot summary of which reads like a Twitter rant by a Berkeley freshman. I think this movie was originally going to be the kind of woke crap we had been seeing. An empty movie with strong female leads that was only made so the company could pat themselves on the back and say they were being allies. It's funny, even leftists who prioritize representation are seeing that this company has been dishonest about it the entire time. But then the winds began to shift. Star Wars Episode 9 brought in half the revenue of 7. Florida passed the Parents' Rights in Education Act, winning a fight that Disney joined and made very public for some reason. Strange World absolutely bombed at the box office, as did Lightyear. Both of those had PR surrounding their gay representation. Captain Marvel was trashed by audiences, and Brie Larson personally begged the internet to dislike her. We also got She-Hulk, which was hilariously misandrist, and the audience hated it. For these companies, the realization began to set in that these social politics are commercially untenable. Fast forward to November 2023, Carol Danvers is no longer the title character, instead sharing the screen with two Disney Plus characters. At the end of the movie, it is instead Ms. Marvel who is going to form a group, because Disney still doesn't get their majority fan base, and thinks Gen Z and Alpha will flock to them if Ms. Marvel, Kate Bishop, and daughter of Ant-Man are the new champions. Oh dear, this is both sad and hilarious at the same time. This movie was gutter sludge. The villain was perhaps the worst villain in the entire MCU history, and that's saying something. The relationship between the main characters was, I mean, they were on screen together. I think they high-fived at one point, so I was led to believe that they were supposed to be bonding. Oh, they jumped rope together for a minute, so
I guess you could say things are getting pretty serious.
the dialogue was horrific. Marvel still thinks silly slapstick like cats that swallow people to transport them is funny. The plot itself was nonsensical. What was really jarring, though, was the editing. Sometimes characters knew things they had no reason to know. King Valkyrie shows up and seems familiar with Carol, but we don't know why. She's just on screen long enough to explain where the Skrulls are going. Rumors place her in a relationship with Danvers that was cut. The character setups don't go where they seem to be aiming. Later, there are supposed payoffs that had no setup. Disjointed would be too kind a word to describe this movie. It is extremely, crystal clear that this is the 6th iteration of this movie. This is a Frankenfilm. Even the normal culture warriors got tired of trying to defend this schlock. But the question is, why? What caused them to delay this again and again? And why is so much of this movie seemingly missing? Well, reports say it was partly due to test audience screening. As I described earlier, the general attitude toward the Hollywood strong female character turned sharply. When you take in the director and actors involved, the mood in Hollywood around 2019, and the general direction of Disney, you don't need to be Columbo to sort out that this movie was a feminist power fantasy nightmare that test audiences rejected multiple times, and Disney began to wise up and needed to strip out the parts that weren't going to play. But what it again reveals is that the wokeness, the performative diversity, the pure identity politics, that's all they ever had. There was never a story here. There were never characters. It was going to be a girl boss bonanza, and once that was removed, there was only the empty husk of what could possibly be called a movie if you squint and you're really far away. Nia DaCosta, Zeb Wells, Megan McDonnell, and Alyssa Karofsky are clearly not talented, and were not hired for their talent, just like this movie wasn't made to serve the audience. But now all the political cover is gone, and the grift is exposed. Well, it exposed it even more. The defense of these movies and characters had been showing for some time that it was all a lie. When fans don't like a female character, they are sexist. That accusation just affirms that there is nothing about these characters to discuss beyond sex. Even the defenders of this crap can't find anything to promote about them other than their surface qualities. People discuss whether Iron Man was a good character or not, but we discuss whether Ironheart is good representation or not, whether she is accurate as a black person or not. Even the framing by its proponents tells you this is all a facade. We got our most recent example with Madame Web, Sony's attempt to jump on the caboose of the girl boss train, but they ran for a really long time and eventually tripped and rolled down the tracks quite comedically. This is another one that began development in 2019, a heady time full of multiverses and estrogen-fueled dreams. It's pretty obvious that the SSU, that's the Sony Spider-Man universe, yes, they're trying to make one. No, it doesn't actually feature Spider-Man, whose name is in the universe. The SSU was clearly too male, so Sony, being lazy, just figured they could throw some women on screen together and all their problems would be solved. By now, you've heard at least in passing that this movie was a train wreck, where the train in question was shipping containers full of model trains, which also spilled out, causing a train wreck. As before, we got news that the version we saw in theaters was like the 16th variation. Multiple rewrites, multiple reshoots, and full-on dub for the villain. The dialogue was the worst kind of exposition dumping you can imagine. The opening of the movie has one character just laying out where they are and what they're doing and a local myth about what they're looking for. Bear in mind, these people have supposedly been in the jungle together for weeks when this highly natural mission briefing style conversation happens. At one point in the movie, they realized they had cut the villain out too much and the main character had no way of knowing who he was. So Dakota Johnson's character just has a vision in her sleep and talks to him, and he spills his whole plan and motivation. It was really one of the worst movies I've ever seen. But that cut villain is what intrigues me about this movie. He's barely there at all, clearly suffering the most from edits and cuts. As I said, he's obviously not saying the original lines even. They edit the shot so that his mouth is not visible much, and even when it is, it's not even matching the lines. Not even close. Now, this is a little conjecture, but given the time period when this movie was approved, the fact that it stars all female heroes, and the fact that the villain is cut as much as possible, my suspicion is that Ezekiel was originally going to be a stand-in for
The patriarchy.
I firmly believe that the original script had him being the most over-the-top sexist douche imaginable, so the all-girl team could kick his misogynistic butt. Look, he's hardly there, but look at what he does when he's on screen. Right away, he's doubtful of the female research lead and concern trolls her because she's pregnant. Then he shoots the pregnant woman. When we next meet him, he's a rich guy, automatically evil, and he seduces a woman just to get her NSA credentials, and then kills her. He has a female computer assistant that he threatens to kill if she doesn't succeed. Finally, his whole plot is killing 3 teen girls like an 80s slasher. If this is all we saw of him, and these things were the bare bones needed to explain why he is even in this movie, then I wonder what was cut or rewritten. Just like these other movies, I think it was changed drastically to tone down the campy dialogue and the straw man. His dubbing is a real sign that his original dialogue had serious issues, and it's fully possible that those issues were lines that sounded like they came from a Tumblr post where the poster claims they clapped back and everyone around cheered. Hopefully one day Dakota Johnson writes a memoir and we find out how this mess really happened. Until then, we can only look at the patterns to draw possible conclusions. Judging from the failed heroines of the last year, it seems clear that the female future so many studio execs envisioned didn't resonate with the audience, and these movies are the result of trying to salvage a production that had angry feminism baked in. The only mystery left is why these heroines aren't working, and it's not a mystery at all, really. It's because this representation is the performative variety, and these women aren't written as women. If the names were changed and these scripts were read to you, they would sound like 80s male action heroes. You would be forgiven for wondering how Schwarzenegger was going to do as a Spider-Person in charge of these teenagers. Dolph Lundgren could step into Captain Marvel's shoes and it would be so natural, you'd wonder if your memories of Brie Larson were just some kind of Mandela effect. Johnson, Larson, and Waller-Bridge play characters so stoic they should be writing their own meditations. And we've got more signs of the changing times. Warner Brothers just decided that Batgirl couldn't even see the light of day, and Disney is canceling several projects and heavily retooling others. Captain America 4 is the next project that I expect to have its social justice elements obviously carved out, and we will get a Franken film just like these 3. What are your thoughts? Is this a sign of real change in Hollywood, or is it just putting down one thing to pick up another? Will we see fewer attempts at representation, or will this spur actual well-written minority characters? I'm interested in your thoughts and your predictions. I appreciate you watching as always, and I'll see you next time.